Hi, Tim Smith. I am really excited to tell you about a new project that I'm working on. It's a really new project, as most people have read some of the things I've written in Donors Are People Too, 1,000 to 1 billion. But something that God put on my heart years ago was to create resources for a segment of the family, but not just any segment of the family, it's for the blended family. And coming soon, I'm going to release a book entitled Blended But Not Broken. And it's the story of the blended family. But it's a perspective from inside the family. It's not a perspective from a psychological perspective or even a theological perspective. But I've had the privilege to lead a blended family, to live inside the confines of that family, and to actually raise children out of that process. But the most exciting part of this project for me is I'm not going to do it by myself. I'm actually going to write this book with my daughter, Christie Meldrum. And Christie is sitting right here with me today. And I couldn't be more excited. We've been talking about this for over 25 years. When we started this journey, you were what, 12 years old, 11 or 12 years old. And I was thrust into being a single dad, raising 3 kids, you and your 2 younger brothers. And now here we sit all these years later, and we're talking about the blended family. And this project, Blended But Not Broken. Mm-hmm. And it's a very special project for me, but I know it just is something important to you. But let's go way back first, okay? And let's talk a little bit about your journey, because I think that's the better story, even than my story, is really what has happened in your life. And so just talk about those early stages, even before the blended part.
Right.
But when did it really start? What was this all like in the early stages for you?
Yeah. So we grew up in a family where I never thought that you and my mom would get divorced or anything like that. So when we initially were walking through this, when mom left and all of a sudden you were a single dad to 3 kids all by yourself, obviously that's not something that we planned for or that you ever thought would happen or that we ever thought would happen. And so it was definitely a very tricky road. Me being the oldest of the kids, I really understood what was happening, but I also remember just believing that I could fix it, that I could get you guys back together, or I could make it right. And I remember in the beginning just thinking that I could do that we could do that. And but I remember, because I understood everything so well, seeing you hurt. And to see your dad cry or to hurt when your dad is the guy who hung the moon, it was really, really hard. And at the same time, you were walking us kids through our own hurt and pain of all of a sudden living in a house where we had a dad and a mom to just having our dad present every single day. And I remember that journey clearly, even though I was only 11, 12 years old, of just the hurt all around that we all kind of had together. But I also feel like it kind of brings up inside of me how close that we got during that time. And because you were hurting, but also walking us through it, I feel like we just became a team and we were bonded. And now that I'm older and I understand things in a little bit different of a way, I feel like I really understand as an adult how much you did not give up on us and how easy it would be for you to just be like, okay, let's just get them through the house and let's raise them and do the best we can. But I feel like we all had something really, really good, and we were on each other's team, and there were some really great moments and very hard moments in those, especially those early days. But I think that made us stronger, and I just really feel as an adult that you just didn't give up on us, and that shows in each of our lives now.
Yeah, and the loss of pain, the pain of loss rather, the pain of brokenness, it stays with you for a lifetime, and it's something that never changes. I always remember that moment, just that day that your mother left and abandoned the home, and we were living in the mountains of California. and it was a January morning, and the snow was on the evergreens, and you could smell those beautiful evergreens. And I remember you kids being at school and just trying to process what I was going to say to you when you came home from school that day.
Yeah.
And I sat on that porch and I was smelling those evergreens. And I remember just crying out to God and just saying, God, don't ever let me forget this. The pain, the hurt, the difficulty of this moment, because I really, in my spirit, I didn't ever want to be back at that place again.
Yeah.
And to this day, when I have that fragrance, I smell an evergreen, it pushes me right back to that moment over 25 years ago. It's amazing how, and it's associated, in my life, it's associated with the pain of loss and brokenness and burden of, because you talk about, we had a mom and a dad, and then we had a dad, a dad who traveled a lot, a dad who had a very busy job, and all of a sudden he had to come and stay home, and he had to cook meals, and he had to help you do homework and get ready for school and pick you up from school and all that stuff, and all those transitions that I was thinking about that moment, but more the difficulty and the heartache that I knew I was going to just rip your worlds apart that afternoon as you came home from school, and the burden of that and the pain of that. But you talk about some of the transitions and things, and maybe we can talk about some of that process later about how to communicate and things like that. And I know you've got a lot of perspective on that many years later. But what were some of the real adjustments for you as a young girl? Just beginning her adolescent years really, and suddenly, I had to learn how to. I remember you coming to me one morning of saying, "Here, will you fix my hair?" And I just was like dumbfounded, like, well, what do I do? There's no book that tells me how to do that, and. There were so many challenges and so many unique experiences between us in those days.
I think some of the things I think about is just the time period that we were in. I was a 12-year-old girl. If there was ever a time that you probably don't want to be a single dad to a girl, that might be the stage that we were in, and just all the changes that I was going through as a young girl, but then all of a sudden being the only girl in the family and learning. I feel like I was so close to you all the time. I feel like I was a dad's girl from a little age, but to know that you were my sole person to go to when anything came up, or the idea that I would ever start bringing up a boy to you, or, just those moments that young girls go through, or at school when moms and daughters did something. I didn't have that option, and so just navigating that with you was just different. And I think looking back, I'm thankful of the relationship that I did have with you, even when we were all a family together before you were a single dad. I think that really played out to be a little bit more natural for us because it wasn't so difficult. We were already very close, but just a young girl getting used to the fact that there was the dad to go to. He was going to solve all the problems that you had as a female, and there were some funny problems that we addressed not very long after those moments. And so I think about those and just have to laugh sometimes at some of the things that we went through. And I know you have a very fun story when it comes to that age.
Oh, it's great. Can I tell that story?
I feel like you want to tell that story.
Okay, I should tell that story.
Okay.
I should tell that story. So, Christie, you were 12 years old, and I had pretty much just decided to stop working for a few months just to be present and to figure this journey out, and so I was picking you up from school. You were in school, and I remember pulling up in front of that school and looking off to I was looking at the front door of that school, and you emerged from the door. We're about 80 yards apart, and your teacher is with you. And you always had this ability to, you'd be a lousy poker player, because your emotion and your state of mind always expressed itself, especially when you were a child. And when I remember you walking out that door and your teacher with you, and you had your coat tied around your waist. And I remember sitting there for 80 yards watching you walk toward me saying, oh boy, today is that day. And your face was just like you'd been crying and everything. And so you kind of came over and got in the car. The teacher, asked me to step out of the car. And she says, so Mr. Smith, Christie has begun her first, let's just call it her first cycle. And yeah, let's call it that, okay? And she says, I don't think your wife has prepared her for this. And I go, oh boy, oh boy, what's this day gonna be like? And so I remember that, getting in the car, and we drove out, and you just burst out in crying. She said, what's wrong with me? What's wrong with me? You really thought you were dying. You thought there was something really wrong with you. And I did too, actually, at that moment. So I remember going home, and I called my older sister, who lived a few hours away, and said, what do I do? And she says, well, look around. I think there's a book in your house. I've seen it. So I remember sitting on the edge of the bed with you that night with this book. I'm holding it like behind me here. I've got you around, like this, and I'm giving you the textbook answers. Well, honey, this is God's way of, all these things that he was doing in your body, and you would just, every time I'd say something, you'd cry more and cry louder, and tears would run down. You said, I don't want to grow up, I don't want to be all that. And I remember that night finally getting you guys all to bed and sitting down all alone and saying, I don't think I can do this. Mm-hmm. I don't think I have what it takes. How am I going to be a mom and a dad? And that was in our first month of me being a single dad, mm-hmm. and being the old Mr. Mom thing. I remember you used to say, Dad, you were Mr. Mom before it was popular.
Yeah.
Nobody, there was no playbook for me. Mm-hmm. And every day it seemed like we were facing something like that. I mean, today we look back at that and we laugh about it. It was funny. It was part of your journey. It was part of it was really part of my journey too. But watching how God walked us through hardships and crisis, and that's what I remember so much in those early stages was, every day it seemed to be, whether it was, I wish you and Mom could just figure this thing out, or it was, just this great sadness that was mm-hmm. on you day on day, and you I know you think about that, and it's such a part of who you are even mm-hmm. today, right?
Totally.
Yeah.
I mean, I think anything that we experience from our younger years all the way through, you carry it with you to some extent. It kind of forms who you become, and out of that, I think you get to choose what you want to do with that. And so now I love to be able to connect with so many people that have went through something like that, or maybe they've went through something like that when they were my age and they haven't dealt too much with it. And so it creates really great conversation in that way. And so I remember all those moments, that we were just talking about, and now it is funny to laugh about them. And we have so many that we could tell. But I think what I really think about is, again, just how you walked us through even the things that you had to read a book on the side while you were trying to parent. You were learning to parent that moment mm-hmm. while you were parenting. But I just think that that's true of how life is, in these moments, mm-hmm. and you walked into something unexpectedly that you didn't know that you would have to deal with a 12-year-old girl by yourself, mm-hmm. and you figured out how to do it. And I think that both of my brothers and myself, whether it was for me that moment, it was for them, all these other moments that they experienced with a single dad, I think we carry that with us today. And I think that we remember, whether we remember every detail, I didn't remember saying that I thought I was going to die or anything like that, but we remember the moments that counted and that we weren't given up on, and when when a parent leaves and you come to this place where you're in a single family, you don't really know how that's going to play out. All the things that you think are the role of a mom, a dad has to figure out, or vice versa, depending on the situation. And so there's a lot of, even though we're children in the moment, there's a lot of moments where we're scared because we don't know what that's going to look like. That's not what's supposed to be normal. And all of a sudden we're, thrust into this position just along with you, like you were, and we have to figure it out. And I just think the biggest theme that I see now in my adult life is remembering that you walked us through a road. And whenever you think about that, when you have to walk somebody through something, while at the same time you're going through your own grief and your own pain and a feeling of hopelessness, it is scary to do, whether it's the situation we talked about or something that you're dealing with at work or whatever. That's a scary road, and it's very hard to do. And so the fact that you weren't working for a season and you were focusing on us, you had your own pain and you were walking us through our pain, that is unbelievable to me sometimes. And I feel more love now thinking about that because I can think about that in my adult years as a parent myself in a whole new way. And those are the things that make me want to tell people how it can be. And we went through this, and my dad walked us through this, but this is where we're at now. I think there's a ton of redemption and hope in a story like that, because so many people are walking the very same road that we did.
Yeah, so there's a lot of stuff to unpack in there, and we'll be doing that. But let me just hit the pause button on some of that right now and talk about this book that we're working on, Blended but Not Broken. Now, both of us kind of hate that idea of broken families, because things that are broken sometimes feel like they're broken, they can't be fixed. And the beauty, I think, of our family story is the redemption story that came along. The redemption story that started with me of having renewal in a relationship and in a marriage, and renewal for you, and how you were really mentored and then shepherded by a phenomenal stepmom. And then the story of you actually being a stepmom today, which is,
totally.
We'll get to that in a minute. Okay. But it's such a beautiful story of redemption and grace. And one of my pet peeves is how we talk about this subject. We talk about divorce, and we go to the book of Matthew, and what does the Bible say about divorce? And we talk about remarriage, and when is it right to remarry? When is it not right to remarry? We even talk about when is it right to divorce and when is it not right to divorce. And nobody's going to ever ask me to parse the Bible of theologically of what it means. So that's not what I'm trying to do. But so often we stop with that. The story stops there. That if you biblically should be remarried, that's great. And if you got remarried, even though biblically you were not free to remarry based on interpretation of those passages, God wants you to stay married. But then we stop the story. We stop talking right there. And like, okay, now that I've gotten remarried, or whether it's of God's design or not, it's good, it's done. When really that's just taking us to the starting line. In these families, because two people coming from brokenness in their spiritual lives and their relationships come together, and then we haul all these kids into that same relationship, and then we put them in the same house, and we ask them to interact with each other and live life. And that's the missing thing, I think, for the church today. And really, for our society, that we've not really created a good playbook, so to speak, for families to work from, to say, okay, how do you come through that? How do you develop those children? How do you develop your relationship in the midst of those kids trying to interact and relate to each other at the same time. So that's a huge story to tell. We're gonna talk about that some more. The book is blended but not broken. It's really going to be a story of redemption. It's going to be a story of renewal. It's going to be a great story of second chances. And I'm excited to see this book hit the market, to be able to share it with you. I think every one of us, anyone listening to me right now, has in their mind a personal story of someone who's gone through divorce, remarriage, and then the blending of two families. And if it's not impacting you, it's somebody close to you. And these resources we're going to create, and it'll probably be a series of 7 or 8 books. These resources that we're going to create are really going to be from the inside of the process, okay? We're going to be working with some good folks that have good psychological perspective of how the brain works and how emotions work and all that. But we're really going to tell you our story of how we did it and the failures we had, the wins that we had, and the continuity that we have today. So we're going to talk a lot more about it. I hope you'll get excited about reading this book. Again, it'll be entitled Blended but Not Broken.